things are getting strange in X-Files We Watch podcast. I'm Nick.
And I'm Kim.
And I had a revelation today.
Oh, yeah?
So, you know how on our guest stars we keep pointing out that some of them have been in Frasier?
Like all of them?
Like all of them. Well, not quite all of them, but a lot of them. I forgot one very important detail.
Which detail?
Guess who also cameoed in Frasier at one point in time?
Gillian Anderson?
Correct.
She's one of the voices, isn't she?
She is, and David Duchovny.
Mm.
So, David Duchovny is in season 3 as Tom in episode 22. And Gillian Anderson is Jenny in season 6, episode 20.
It's been a while, but I remember Gillian Anderson's voice being recognisable. I don't remember David Duchovny.
We'll have to keep watch out for him, because we've just started rewatching Frasier, so we'll keep an ear out. So, episode 22, Frasier Loves Roz, I think, is the episode.
Okay.
And David Duchovny is one of the callers.
Interesting, as Tom.
As Tom. Have you got any news for us?
Yeah, I thought I'd just bring up Gillian Anderson's Instagram, because her new project sounds kind of interesting. She announced on Insta earlier this week that she was starting to collate people's experiences for a book that she's writing. The experiences in question, she's looking for people to write to her anonymously via Instagram to discuss their sexual kind of fantasies. So it's particularly women that she's looking for, or at least people that identify as women, who are just to share these with her. Apparently it's all encrypted, it's all totally anonymous. You just send them kind of Dear Dana, and she'll collate these answers into a book, which I thought sounded actually pretty interesting.
Very cool. She's the modern day Nancy Friday then.
Yeah, that's exactly what she's going for.
And presumably also keying off her role in Sex Education, which we have yet to watch. But
I haven't watched it, but I've kind of got to assume that this is maybe where she's starting to have been thinking about things like this. It sounds like it's interesting. The idea is to kind of show that women's sexual experiences and kind of fantasies are as rich and complex as men's, which is predominantly what get portrayed in the media.
Yeah, there was a thing in The Guardian actually this week about the Nancy Fridays version, and how apparently it was absolutely shocking to a lot of people because there's an assumption that men go out and sow their wild oats and women are naturally nurturing creatures. So no one anticipated that women would have sexual fantasies, bizarrely. I
guess you're going on that outdated belief that men need to be experienced, but women should be absolutely not so.
Exactly. And so basically this in the 70s that just blew people's minds.
Yeah, she did specifically note this time as it's not just people who are born women she's looking for. She wanted to hear experiences from people who identify as women, people who are non-binary, people who aren't intersex at all, just the wider variety that we now, of course, know and openly discuss.
Very cool.
Mm.
Good on Gillian Anderson.
Yeah.
So is it Dear Dana or is it Dear Gillian? I mean, if it's Dear Dana, that's kind of cool too.
Oh, did I say Dear Dana? I meant to say Dear Gillian. Got Dana Scully on the brain. But yeah, it's Dear Gillian. If you just find her on Instagram, there's information about how to submit if you want to take part in this.
Very cool. I don't think we've got any other news of note, have we?
No, I don't think I've got any more gossip. I just thought that was kind of interesting and tangentially connected.
Yeah, I like that. Okay, so I suppose we should talk about these episodes. We've delayed it as long as we can, in the absence of anything else. We can tell we're really excited about this one, can't you?
Yeah.
Okay, Anna, first for us this week would be, we do have a content warning for 3, which does describe an abusive relationship, and is kind of intrinsic to the backstory of one of the characters.
Yeah, there's nothing actually depicted on screen, but the description she gives is quite prolonged and graphic. So just bear that in mind, I guess, listening to this episode, but more so watching the actual episode itself. So
we have 3 and 1 Breath. 3 is directed by David Nutter and written by Chris Rupenthal and Morgan Wong. First broadcast on the 4th of November 1994. The only significant guest star of note is Perry Reeves, who played Kristen Killar, who was David Duchovny's partner at the time. And the only other thing we've seen her in is Sliders as Taryn Miller, who I really do remember. In Los Angeles, a man attempts a one-night stand with a woman he met at a corporate party. However, while having sex in his hot tub, the woman bites him and drinks his blood. 2 other men assist by jabbing him with hypodermic needles. Mulder files Scully's badge as an X-File before heading to Los Angeles. Mulder explains to the LAPD the murder is the latest in a string of vampire-inspired serial killings in 2 other states. Because the killers tend to write Bible passages in the victim's blood, Mulder believes that they think of themselves as an unholy trinity. Mulder visits a blood bank with a recent new hire and catches the man drinking blood and arrests him. He tells Mulder he is part of a trio seeking immortality. He is the son, and the other two are the father and the unholy spirit. Mulder does not believe him, but the son appears to burn to death in sunlight. Mulder is completely surprised at apparent confirmation of vampires. The vampire has a tattoo or a stamp for a club Treppiz, a vampire bar. Mulder meets Kristin Killar. He follows her when she leaves with her patron. Her partner threatens Mulder and is then killed by the Trinity, for reasons unknown. Mulder finds Kristin has followed the path of the Trinity, and he and the LAPD search a home, but discover blood bread, a protective measure, in the oven. Mulder waits for Kristin, who tells him of her abusive relationship with the son and how he met the rest of the Trinity. She fled and they followed. Mulder and Kristin are implied to sleep together while the son spies on them. The son confronts Kristin the next morning and tells her to kill Mulder and drink his blood, believe his blood, will make her one of them. Kristin approaches Mulder with a knife, but instead stabs the father who was hiding behind the bed. Mulder and Kristin try to flee, but the unholy spirit attacks them. Kristin rams her with her car and impales her on a wooden peg. Kristin tricks Mulder into fleeing on foot, while she douses herself and the son with gasoline and lights a match. In the aftermath, the firefighters find 4 bodies in the house. So first up is the whole, this is the writer who gave us Roland.
A really good, in fact, one of my favourite episodes in the last season.
Yes, and he wrote this one.
Why?
Well, I do remember a bit of this history because there was an infamous kind of anecdote was that this was written for season 1, and you can really tell in some places, but no one could figure out how to remove Scully from the equation at that point in time. And so basically it was held on, recycled and slotted in here.
Okay, yeah.
I mean, admittedly, it's not clear whose fault this is. Is this Chris Rubenthal, who has written 2 episodes, or is it Morgan and Wong, who are generally quite good at this, but have somehow produced an episode that's awkward and boring and...
I try to find something positive to say about every episode, but cards on the table is I detest this episode. I absolutely hate it.
I think it's got the hallmarks of being... You can tell it was written for season 1, knowing that.
Mm.
It's some of the stuff that Mulder comes out with that is given no fair warning to the audience, like the whole, he's been tracking these serial killers across 2 states. Because, really, Mulder? Would this not have come up at some other point in time?
Never been mentioned before.
Also, you've only just been reassigned to the X-Files. You weren't doing this in your regular job. There's no way they would have let you near this kind of investigation with bloodletting and writing Bible passages on the walls.
Mm-hmm.
Just no. So that does not jibe at all.
I'm also going to put out there now that, as noted, I hate this episode so much. So I did ask you all on Twitter last week if anyone could help me out and defend this and give me anything positive to say, and not a single person replied. So I've got to assume that either you're incredibly loyal and you just didn't want to say a bad thing about the X-Files or anything like that, or that nobody likes this episode. And I'm not sure which to go with, so if you are a fan of 3, please let me know. I will redact this in a future episode and talk about someone who actually likes it, but nobody has helped me out on this one whatsoever.
It's definitely not one for the Scully shippers.
No, maybe that's in part. A lot of people do still really like shipping Mulder and Scully together. Maybe that's why this one doesn't seem to have a fan base.
Well, actually, on that note, reading over the Wikipedia article, while the episode goes out of its way to imply Mulder has definitely slept with Kristin in this episode, the Wikipedia article is very evasive. Because it says they kiss and the son is spying on them. And it completely leaves out all the off-screen implication stuff. Even though
I think it's pretty heavily implied.
Yeah, especially as it explicitly does note correctly that the guy is having sex with the unholy spirit in his hot tub at the start.
I mean, that's probably the most graphic sex scene we've had on the X-Files so far.
Absolutely.
In the opening. That is quite sexy.
It had quite a lot of bare skin for a change.
Even though, of course, you still see nothing. But
well, network TV and everything. The other point, I think, of where you can tell this is an episode that's been recycled is how badly this Scully stuff is glued onto it. Because it's you have the cold open with the guy being attacked in his hot tub and the bloodletting and everything else.
Yeah.
Then you have Mulder filing away Scully's badge and the X-File about her in the filing cabinet. And then he gets a phone call. And we immediately cut to LA. Really? You just called Mulder and said, get out to LA and go tackle those serial killers that you've apparently been waiting for 3 months.
As you do.
As you do. I think it's one of those, is it fair to judge them on the quality of this, which is kind of yes. At the same time, they were forced to leap through hoops to have this spacing episode in between Gillian Anderson's appearances to make sure that she'd actually recover enough. Is basically, I think, what they were doing, but it's so awkwardly glued together. All the stuff that refers to Scully is just kind of forced in. Because we've got that. I think you also made that point of Kristen has the whole point about someone special's missing and she's far away or something. And the implication would normally be they've died, wouldn't it?
From the way it's wording, it does sound like.
Yeah, and Mulder is a bit weirdly evasive on it, isn't he?
Mm.
One detail we have got is, so Mulder regains the X-Files, but basically they haven't reused the office for anything. And we'll learn next episode what the X-Files office used to be for, which says a lot about the FBI, apparently. But basically they've put plastic sheets over everything in the X-Files office, and it has been exactly 6 months since they were shut down.
Yes, you see Mulder turning the pages on the calendar.
Yeah. And 6 months feels kind of short for the duration we've been kind of shown.
I don't know. I think it feels right, to be honest.
Okay.
It's on the basis of the fact that Mulder's been pushed to the verge of quitting through the surveillance he's been doing. If it had been longer than 6 months, I think he would have quit.
Well, obviously we've got that too. Although we also have the weird bit where he was re-energized in Little Green Men and then didn't care in the host.
Yeah, we already said last week that the kind of pacing's a bit all over the place.
Yeah.
With Mulder's characterization, which is, again, in part why I don't like this episode so much, as characterfully he's still upset because of Scully's abduction, but he sleepwalks through this entire episode.
But he is shaving, though, so it's actually one up on how he was at the end of Ascension.
Yeah, he's shaving, but he's... when I used to watch The X-Files at home, my dad always used to complain that David Duchovny speaks in monotone. My dad always characterized him as being perpetually depressed, and it used to wind me up as a teenager because I don't view Mulder that way. He's not perpetually depressed all the time. But this episode is my dad's stereotype of Mulder. Kind of miserable, depressed, kind of sombrous, monotone voice.
I think the other sort of hallmark of early X-Files stuff is the info dump that Mulder gives at the crime scene. He walks onto this crime scene with the LAPD and just drops this serial killer vampire trinity thing on them.
He kind of does the Sherlock Holmes kind of genius savant description of the crime scene.
But without actually doing anything of the crime scene, because it's basically all based on the previous crime scenes, like the blood on the walls and the biblical quotes.
Ah, yes, that biblical quote, which I have here because it's the least kind of subtle biblical quote of all time. Even without looking, I think you can guess which one it is. Because this is John 52:54, I think?
That's the one.
It's not actually a biblical quote that actually exists. It should be John 6:54. But it is, he who eats of my flesh and drinks of my blood shall have eternal life. I will raise him up on the last day. Which is your very, very typical vampire-y quote from the Bible.
Yeah, and not drink this wine, it is a Merlot.
That would be Eddie Izzard. So yeah, you've got your absolute unsubtlety kind of Manson family attack on an affluent person with loads of vampire-y imagery like biting and exsanguination and a vampire-y unsubtle biblical quote written on the wall.
But then also they use syringes, which is one of those whole... But then she was biting him at the start, so why have you got syringes as well?
Well, we quickly learn that they're not very good vampires.
We also quickly learn that people are treating blood like a drug in this episode, and you've got to sort of say to the writer, have you ever tasted blood? It's kind of disgusting.
Got to admit, it's kind of late night TV as an example, but I saw a documentary about kind of vampire clubs in America and this sort of culture. It's not far out, to be honest. You know, you do have a subculture of this kind of thing, incredibly, incredibly small and niche, I'm sure it is, but, you know, it exists, like we see in Club Tepes.
The incredibly subtle Club Tepes. Could have called it Club the Impaler, really.
Well, I think I said to you when we got to that point in the episode, it's like, why did we wait so long to go to the
vampire club,
obvious vampire club in the city where an obvious vampire murder has just taken place?
But we also have weird things like Mulder starts ringing up blood banks and checks for new hires. And it's like the first one you hire is the son, it turns out, John.
I guess you're going on the basis of this has happened in other cities before, so this is something to look for, somebody who will have come to the area, kind of between the two killings.
But I mean, the thing that he does, though, is he doesn't do it in the capacity of a law enforcement agent. He does it like
Marty Mulder.
He does it like social engineering in terms of computer hacking. Because this is what you do. You pretend to be someone else, ring someone up, and ask them for an access detail.
I thought that was quite good for the argument that often writers don't seem to get with Mulder, is that he's good at reading people. Because he completely charms the person on the other end of the phone to ignore any data protection protocols and give him the information.
Oh, yeah. But then I like how blatant this Night Watchman is. I mean, for one thing, do blood banks actually have Night Watchmen?
I'd like to think so.
Well,
I'm not sure who would steal blood other than in this very specific circumstance.
But you've got the details because the other guy says, oh yeah, the new guy's always breaking light bulbs. And then Mulder just catches him just drinking blood. It's like no subtlety at all.
I think even Angel in Buffy was more subtle about getting his backhand blood bags.
Yeah. And it's also kind of weird that basically the son is playing at having severe light phobia at all times.
Even when it's not natural light, he does seem to have photophobia because they make him change the light for the red bulb in the interrogation.
Yeah.
I'm going to guess, much like with keeping reptiles, that red bulbs are supposedly on a wavelength that they can't see, and therefore it's better.
Possibly. It also makes me think, of course, of Johan Vasquez, the creator of Invader Zim, who, upon arrival at the Nickelodeon offices, there's basically a big skylight over where his desk was, and he got them to put these red sort of plastic sheets up over the top of it. So basically, he wouldn't have direct sunlight, but everyone in the office said it was like working in the post-apocalypse looking outside because he just got this red light shining down.
That sounds fun. I was thinking of it more as it's a bit of outdated information, but it used to be a belief in the reptile community that you could put a red night bulb in a tank and it wouldn't upset the animal. But this is on a kind of outdated belief that the animals couldn't see on the wavelengths, and in fact they can. So, I was thinking of that kind of idea, and probably at the time this episode was made, that information wouldn't have been known and all the rest of it.
Yeah. But in this episode of Tradition, they were trying not to say vampire as best they could. They can't hold it off forever, but they try. Because when Mulder's interrogating the son, he's very careful not to actually call him a vampire or admit to being a vampire.
Maybe Mulder's learnt from Duane Barry and we don't feed into the delusions of the maniac anymore.
Possibly, although I actually would say connect it, oddly enough, to a Channel 4 programme around the same time, though possibly a few years later, called Ultraviolet.
Okay, I vaguely remember.
It's a British series, sci-fi fantasy series, about vampire plague and the government bureau that fights the vampires. But they had a strict rule that they never, ever say vampires. It's throughout the entire programme. So they always call them leeches or Code Vs, or Code 5, sorry, which is V, vampire.
It's a bit like Walking Dead and zombies.
Yeah. At the time, I think there was a urge to get away from using them because it would bring up the campy aspect of the monster rather than the horror aspect of the monster.
This is part of my belief in the X-Files where virtually every Monster of the Week episode is a vampire story.
Yeah, but they don't call
Toombs is the liver vampire. I'm sure I will come across more vampires to add to this analogy as I go along. But every story is a monster that needs to feed on X to survive. We just replace blood with another organ or something like that.
Yeah.
Which I know is a very broad definition of vampire, but it's how to do a vampire plot without it seeming like a vampire plot.
Also, these are some lousy vampires.
Oh, they are so lame.
Well, they're allegedly immortal, but that gets very iffy. But you can see them in mirrors.
Even though they believe they cannot be seen in mirrors.
Yeah, which we've got to say, they can't fly. They don't have any of the mind control stuff that some types get.
No kind of polymorphism. There's no turning into mist and bats.
No, there's not even, the fang face thing that Buffy did.
Now, basically, you get people that apparently set on fire in sunlight and may be immortal if you believe what the sun says, and that's about it.
I mean, well, we should probably get to that setting on fire in sunlight, because there is absolutely no explanation for what happens here, or how he survives it either.
I quite enjoy the pathologist who's examining him, who just looks utterly confused of why he's there. Out.
But it's the whole thing of, if we meant to buy that he's a vampire and he's burned to death in the sun at the start, fine, I can go with that. As on rewatch of this, though, it's a case of, what do you mean he's alive at the end? Because I had flat out forgotten he came back in.
I think it's in part that the guy who plays the son looks a lot like the father.
Yeah,
it's
really
easy
bad.
to get the two of them mixed up in the low light at the end.
They're appallingly badly cast for distinction. Then again, though the Unholy Spirit is also cast so in low light levels, she's like Kristen, just to give you an ambiguity.
Yeah, you only really see the Unholy Spirit in one brief scene, I think. The bit in the garage where she...
Yeah, where she dies.
I should be doing quotation marks around this, dies.
I am amused watching this episode where basically we got Kristen's name wrong like every time they said it.
Oh, I have it crossed out. I've got Crystal spelled a different way, Kirsten, and finally Kristen. I got there eventually.
Yeah, I got Krista, Kirsten, and then Christo. Oh, sorry, Kristen. How is it so difficult to actually get someone to say her name properly?
I think I was just so unengaged that I just kept mishearing her name, I must admit.
That's probably fair. I mean, the other thing I think reading the synopsis series is that basically nothing happens.
There is a lot of talking, and not the good kind of talking, which I'll get into with One Breath, which is talking used for the correct ways. This is just talking for the sake of it. Things like, as we said in the content warning, Kristen's kind of exceptionally graphic and nasty backstory about the abuse that she kind of received from her father as a child and stuff like that. She didn't really add much to the story, but it was just talking for the sake of talking.
Yeah, it's none of this whole be abusive, get into blood sports, apparently. That seemed to be what they were going for.
I'm not sure we can draw the connection of you were abused as a child, so therefore you're into what they call in the episode blood sport. I guess you were kind of going on the basis of people who are abused in their childhood are more likely to be in abusive relationships as they grow up because, that becomes the norm. But tying that into this kind of vampire-y fetish is just a stretch beyond.
Yeah, and it's just all kinds of awkward. I mean, we also have just weird things like the Unholy Trinity, we learn, are trying to pursue Kristen around for whatever reason, making Mulder initially believe that she's the one part of the group because she's moved to the same places and they followed after her. She picks up this guy at the club, possibly to spite Mulder, it feels. Takes him off to this random location.
Which has a kitchen, and that's about all I know about what this location is.
Yeah, and then the guy spots Mulder and beats him up. And Mulder, at no point, identifies himself as FBI or something. Mm. And then Kristen apparently flees, and the Unholy Trinity turn up to eat him.
Just to ensure that Kristen's DNA evidence is on the scene along with these three other people.
And some raspberry sauce, just to throw you off the scent.
I guess it's maybe, up until this point, I was kind of assuming that Kristen had to be the Unholy Spirit, but to then put in 4 different DNAs on the sign, it's your first indication that Krista's nothing to do with this. I'm calling her Krista again. It's Kristen, isn't it?
It's Kristen.
Yeah.
And then, following on from that, we've got Mulder being, I don't know, just, what is he doing when he decides not to tell the police that he's found the blood bread in the oven? Because Mulder just then switches allegiances to Kristen upon finding the blood bread, which, okay, it's a protective measure from the old ways.
No, I'd like more information about the blood bread, to be honest. Is how did we bake this?
And how did it not smell horrible?
I don't know much about baking. Admittedly, it's not something I'm very good at. But is there a way to bake the bread so that the blood remains so thick and liquidy in the middle? It's basically got a liquid centre that's not soaked through the rest of the bread. It's even if it's baked like that or if it's put in afterwards, would the bread not just absorb it all? I don't understand. If this is a genuine food, I want to know how it works. But yeah, sorry, nitpicking, but the blood bread, it was one of the few things I remembered from this episode because I thought, what the hell, the first time I saw it as well.
The other thing I thought was interesting is the police remark that she's got needles and a snakebite kit, and so needles, I understand, for she's into this whole blood fetish thing. Fair enough. The snakebite kit, though, it kind of implies that they're like the Twilight vampires, where they've got venom, so you want to extract it. I don't understand what the snakebite kit is there for, unless she genuinely has problems with snakes.
Would it just be another way to extract blood?
Well, maybe, but
is it one of these snakebite kits that are supposed to draw poison out of a wound?
Well, that's what I interpret it as, yeah.
which again is a kind of outdated thing, I think, but it's still...
You're not going to get blood out that easily that way, are
I
you?
presume... Well, it's not just going to pull poison out, it must pull blood out as well.
But if she's got syringes, use a syringe, that's what they're there for.
Maybe it's something about how they work. I've never seen one of these
not
kits.
me either, but...
If there is some way you could use it more erotically than a syringe, I'm not sure. I'm Googling it.
While Kim looks this up, I would note as well, though, one of the odd details of Kristen is she has no mirrors in the house. And I get traditionally vampires don't like mirrors, but usually it's because people will notice that you don't have a reflection. But these vampires not only do have mirrors, Kristen isn't a vampire, so why she has no mirror, I don't understand either.
These snakebite kits, I'm looking at one online, which I presume is what she had with her because it looks pocket-sized, but they look a bit like those things that you can buy to remove bee stings. So essentially what I'm looking at is a small kit that has some antiseptic and a scalpel in it. So you would cut into the area where the person had been bitten, put this kind of suction cup thing over the top and use it to draw blood and poison out the wound. So the only thing I can think of is it's just more into this blood play is you'd be getting a bigger draw of blood or something like that.
Just use a syringe, it's really easy.
They look bigger than a syringe though, so presumably you're extracting a bit more on it.
Well, maybe.
So yeah, it was what I was imagining it to be, and I'm still confused.
Yeah.
I guess I need somebody who's actually into these kind of blood sports to explain it to me. If any of you are on Twitter, of course, I would be interested to know how they work. Please, just tell me for my curiosity, otherwise my brain doesn't stop.
And then we get the thoroughly weird climax of this episode, I suppose, after Mulder has some sex, we think.
Off screen,
obviously. To give everyone plausible deniability. So then we get the whole John wants to make Kristen into a vampire, or a full vampire, which will break their Trinity thing, so not sure. I think ultimately as well, one thing that comes through is the fact that we get nothing about the Father and the Holy Spirit whatsoever.
Not even names.
Not even names. Not any appreciation of how they came together, how they found John. It's like, it's an artifact of, I don't know, it just feels like a half-written episode, doesn't it?
Kristen does mention that in her backstory, is that one day John just came home with these two other people.
But that doesn't help.
Because I think you vaguely touched upon it, but that was the backstory, is she was in an abusive relationship with John. The two of them got into blood sports together because she kind of, as you previously noted, she views blood as a kind of drug. She has this huge speech where she says, "Have you ever tasted blood?" It's like, yes. Literally everyone has. But then she mentions that John, she kind of saw it as a kinky thing. John saw it as this kind of violent, controlling thing. And eventually he came back with two other people, and that's when the murder started. But that's as much of a backstory you get of these other two people.
And it feels also then very exploitative that you started with the Holy Spirit in the sex scene, showing as much flesh as you can get away with. And that's her function, is looking sexy.
My God, I entirely forgot that was her as well.
Yeah.
She does appear in two scenes.
Literally her in two scenes.
In my head, that was Kristen for some reason. I guess I just can't detach myself with the logic that Kristen would be the third part of this trinity.
Well, I think that's what the episode wants you to believe all the way through.
Which is why you don't see her that clearly at the start.
Yeah.
And Kristen looking uncannily like her.
Yeah, which is, that at least makes sense as casting. The John and Father stuff doesn't. I mean, there's other bits and pieces like Kristen manages to slam the Holy Spirit into a peg on the garage wall, and it's a case of, sure, there's your vampire staking, but we don't do anything with that bit either.
And at that point, it shouldn't be able to kill her because they make a big deal about how only a vampire can kill a vampire, and she's not a vampire at that point. She's not until she tastes her own blood.
Yeah, and then we get into a very odd method of creating vampires, which I don't think I've seen elsewhere.
Rules lawyering, we will call it.
Well, yes, there's a bit of rules lawyering. The whole, you can't kill us. Well, if I douse you with gasoline and then drink Mulder's blood, which is on my head, which is the blood of the believer, which surely
I thought it was her own blood. She cracks her own head. Is it not that she tastes her own blood?
Well, it might be, but then it's still...
Because she's the believer.
Well, possibly, but it was going to be Mulder before she changed...
It was supposed to be Mulder as part of this sacrifice, but the way I saw it in the episode, she cracks her head and that's her own blood. Because I was thinking down the basis of how did Mulder's blood get on the back of her head until I kind of realised that.
Oh, okay, well, that makes sense.
But again, drinking your own blood feels like a cheat.
Yeah. But she does apparently kill him and herself and the other two vampires, and everyone's dead, and we can get out of LA and never come back.
And never mention vampires again.
That's much better. Have you got anything else for this episode, or should we shuffle as quickly along as we can?
So during the interrogation, we get the closest thing to motive in this episode, and it is weak as all hell. Assuming hell is weak, of course. But it's the only time that Mulder gets to speak with any of the actual vampires, not counting Kristen at length, is he has this kind of very brief interrogation with the son before the son's immolation.
Oh, yeah.
But the son kind of gives this very trite, very overdone description of how vampires think of, oh, it's not murder, you wouldn't call it murder if you kill a cow.
Oh, if a frog eats fly.
Yeah, frog eats fly, that's the argument. Because he's just feeding, so it can't be murder because he's this higher alpha predator. And then he goes on this long tangent about how there's clearly no afterlife because he can see it in the eyes of his victims, that there is nothing after, which kind of disproves everything I think we've seen on the X-Files so far, where we've got ghosts, we know there's something after death.
Well, and we have miraculous resurrection for Miracle Man, unless that was purely delusion.
You got everything that Luther Lee Boggs said about the dark place.
Yep.
So we've already got some, admittedly sometimes conflicting, but an idea that there is something after death for definite in the X-Files world. And then you have the bizarrety of the fact that he squeals about how, no, like, you can't see me in a mirror while Mulder is holding up a mirror showing his reflection. And it's a truly bizarre sequence that just shows how whoever wrote this episode just hasn't thought out any kind of concise or convincing motivation for this group.
No, not.
Other than the fact that they're crazies who think they are vampires, and by later evidence in the episode of him bursting into flames in sunlight, might actually be vampires.
But then he also isn't dead for no reason that makes any sense either.
Because he can only be killed by a vampire, not that pesky
Oh, I suppose not
10
that
seconds
pesky
in the
sun.
sunlight.
So they don't have to be worried about sunlight then.
Maybe you've got this idea with these ones too, that there are specific ways to kill them, and specific things that they are vulnerable to.
Yeah, I'll give you that one.
We just learn so little about them because you've just got to believe what the sun says, and with the whole mirror thing, we know that not everything that the sun believes is accurate.
So, One Breath was directed by R.W. Goodwin, written by Glenn Morgan and James Wong, and broadcast on the 11th of November 1994. There were a few guest stars in this episode, but only one of note. Weirdly enough, Nurse Owens is no one we've seen in anything else. And Melissa McGraw as Melissa Scully we have. She's in Seinfeld as Angela, and she's in Millennium, or will be in Millennium, as Dr. Stoller.
Okay.
But otherwise, we've seen everyone in this episode before. We know who they are and we know how they work.
Margaret Scully, that's Scully's mom, begins with an opening narration recounting a story from Scully's childhood in which she and her brothers shot at a snake, and when Scully saw blood and realised that the snake had died, she instantly regretted what she'd done. This flashback then kind of fades out to present day, where Scully's mom shows that she's now ready to let go of her daughter. She and Mulder are in the process of collecting the gravestone, but Mulder still doesn't want to give up on the fact that Scully might be alive. Almost immediately, Scully turns up mysteriously at a hospital. She's in a coma. The doctors don't know how she's got there, but it's very clear that she's deteriorating fast, and they're kind of stuck on what they can do to help her because they don't know exactly what happened to her and how long she's been like that. The doctor in charge of Scully explains to Mulder and Margaret that Scully has a living will that gives really specific conditions for when she needs to be taken off life support. She's in a bad way and she's virtually at this criterion now. While visiting Scully at her bedside, Mulder also meets Scully's older sister Melissa for the first time. Melissa is a New Ager. She believes in things like crystal healing and believes that she can feel Scully's life force. She thinks Scully is ready to let go. Throughout the episode, we also get these visions of Scully sitting in a boat. Predominantly, this is how she appears in a lot of the visions. It's a boat that's kind of tethered to a dock by a rope, where Scully seems to be able to see that people are talking to her, but she's not reacting in any way. The only person that Scully does seem to hear is someone called Nurse Owens, who is frequently seen at her bedside talking with her. While other people are visiting Scully and preparing for the worst, Fro Hickey of the Lone Gunman also visits and notices something unusual on her medical charts. He sneaks it out to the other Lone Gunman who can investigate this. Byers notes that Scully's blood contains branch DNA, which may have at one point been used for identification, but it's now inactive as it served whatever purpose it did have. Now it's kind of nothing more than a poison, a kind of waste product that is in her system, and even a healthy person would struggle to fight this. In Byers' eyes, and very evident from the look on his face, he thinks that Scully isn't going to live much longer. Mulder then visits Scully again while another nurse is taking her blood. While the nurse is distracted, taking care of another patient who flatlines, a mysterious man kind of breezes over, steals Scully's blood sample and runs away. Mulder chases this man into the parking lot where he is confronted by Mr. X, who tells Mulder that he needs to stop pursuing what happens to Scully and just let her die. He then executes the man who stole her blood in front of him, inferring to Mulder that this is the kind of thing that he's going to have to become prepared to do himself if he's going to pursue this further. Following this incident, Skinner calls Mulder into his office. He's kind of inferred that Mulder had something to do with it, though Mulder keeps denying everything, and puts this on Skinner, pointing out how irritating it is when somebody keeps denying you things when you know that they know something about them, inferring to Skinner's involvement with the smoking man. Mulder is absolutely evident that the cigarette smoking man has something to do with this and thinks that Skinner is someone who can put him online to the smoking man. Skinner refuses to give him any information. Scully has a different vision at this point, in which she's lying on a flat table, a slab, and is visited by her deceased father, reprising his role from Beyond the Sea. The father then name-drops the episode One Breath in a lengthy and rather moving speech in which he describes about how much he would have given up in life if he could only have spent a little more time with Scully and told her what he really felt towards her. In the hospital, it has finally become time to take Scully off her life support. She has reached the parameters stated by her living will, and although Mulder fights it, Scully's mom steps up and says that they all need to respect Scully's decision, and if he respects her, he will do the same. She makes quite clear that Scully is coming off the life support machine immediately, but invites Mulder to sit with them, counting him as part of the family if he wants to mourn with them. While Mulder is in the hospital cafeteria with Melissa, he is approached by a strange woman who asks for change for the cigarette machine, and when she moves over to it, says there's a pack of Moorleys in there and it's not her brand. Mulder opens this packet and finds the cigarette-smoking man's address inside it. Clearly it was something left for him. Mulder bursts into the cigarette-smoking man's home and holds him at gunpoint, demanding to know why Scully was taken and not him. The cigarette-smoking man seems unsurprised to see Mulder and indeed a little impressed by it. He claims that he liked both of them, which is why that Scully was returned to him. He also reveals that he is the one who told Skinner that Mulder was involved in the shooting in the parking lot, although he makes clear that he didn't believe this to be true. Through this, we also get the idea that Cigarette Smoking Man maybe doesn't know about Mr. X just yet, which is probably exactly as Mr. X likes it. The cigarette smoking man calmly stands up to Mulder and points out the fact that if Mulder wants to learn the truth, he'll never get it if the cigarette smoking man dies. Mulder therefore decides not to kill him. Mulder returns to the FBI headquarters and hands in a resignation letter to Skinner. Skinner shreds this in front of him and recounts to Mulder this out-of-body experience he had when he was in the Vietnam War. Skinner does reveal once again that he is helping Mulder in every way he can, pointing out that it was Skinner that actually did provide him with the cigarette-smoking man's location. As Mulder is leaving the FBI headquarters, he encounters X again. X has provided him with a chance to have revenge on the man who took Scully. The man has been led to believe that Mulder has specific information in his apartment and he will break into it at a specific time to claim it. Mulder waits with his gun drawn for the man to arrive, however, Melissa appears first. Although initially Mulder does want to stay and wait to have his revenge on the person who took Scully, Melissa is able to convince him that Scully is about to die and he needs to be at her side. We see then that Mulder does actually listen to Melissa. He sits with Scully at her bedside and holds her hand, and when he returns to his home, he finds that his apartment has been entirely trashed. Mulder finally breaks down, just sits on the floor of his apartment and cries. The following day, Scully has a miraculous recovery and awakens in the hospital. Mulder is called in to see her, and she indicates the fact that he is responsible for her recovery. She heard him and it gave her strength. Mulder takes this moment to return to her the cross necklace that he found in Ascension. Scully also reveals that she doesn't remember anything after Duane Barry took her and has no idea what has happened to her in the missing time between. At the end of the episode, Scully speaks with one of the other nurses and asks if she can speak and thank Nurse Owens. The nurse tells Scully that no nurse by the name of Owens has ever worked at the hospital.
Da-da-da-da. Thank you.
I feel like I covered a lot of ground in that one.
I'll start with, this is one of the X-Files film videos they put out back in the day, where they just edited two or three episodes together to make a nice film. Well, allegedly nice film, because what they actually do is they cut the cold opens off and put them into the main body of the film and then just play the title sequence at the start. So you actually get a really weird experience where you start with the X-Files theme tune, then you get Duane Barry being abducted at the start of that episode, and then everything else runs after it.
I imagine the bit with the garter snake probably comes out of nowhere in the middle
of
this.
It does, because then you get the fade down at the end of Ascension, then you fade up to Margaret telling the story. What got me, though, at the time was, could you not have edited in the bit of Mulder putting Scully's badge into the X-Files? Just that little sliver, just put that in as well as a continuity bit, but no.
It feels like a bad one to... I know it's the obvious thing to stitch this onto Ascension, but so much time passes after that it makes it seem a lot more instant than the definitely maybe 6 months or so that have passed in this.
Yes, also One Breath is transparently a different genre than Duane Barry and Ascension.
I've got to admit, if I count them as a trilogy, I still like Duane Barry the best, but One Breath is a really good episode, but it's also a very sedate episode.
Yes, it's also got literally nothing to do with aliens, or even the appearance of aliens.
It's still a conspiracy episode.
It's still a conspiracy episode, yeah, but it's got nothing to do with the abductions or Duane Barry or anything.
No, it's a much more philosophical one. It's a lot of characters kind of sharing their thoughts, and you get a better read on many of the characters like Skinner and X because of it.
Absolutely. And indeed, Cigarette Smoking Man. His whole I'm doing what I believe is right, which is an interesting one.
It's probably the most he's ever spoken in an episode up to now.
I do very much like the whole sort of when Mulder confronts him in this case of, and he actually says, look at me, look what I've got, because I'm, in this position of power. I've sacrificed everything else for this. I've got no wife, no kids. I'm in some crummy apartment somewhere watching late night TV.
And yet he's seen presidents die.
Yeah.
Which I love as a kind of mic drop line.
It's very, very threatening. At the same time, though, it's if you pick at it, you come down to the whole... There's some weird threads left at the end of this that they don't do anything with, in that Skinner knows how to find him. And
this point.
And Skinner absolutely refuses to pass on any of the information. And they did check, and the Cancer Man is never wearing a badge in any shots. He's just wandering into the FBI with impunity.
The cigarette smoking man evidently has more power than Skinner does, whatever branch of the government he actually belongs to.
Oh, yeah.
He calls the shots, and it is a sheer rebellion in this episode when Skinner puts the no smoking sign on his desk.
I like that. And he just defiantly lights up the cigarette anyway.
It's the rebellion of lighting it and then kind of stamping it out without doing anything.
Well, it's like, Skinner, you've still got an ashtray. If you're really going to commit to this no smoking thing, get rid of the ashtrays. Force the bastard to take it elsewhere.
It's a bit scary, though, because we know how badly Deep Throat was done in when he didn't toe the line. Skinner doesn't have as much power as the cigarette-smoking man. This is going to backfire.
Oh my, yes. There's some odd questions at the start, and we do just gloss over it and then sort of sidestep it and never get back to it. Of how Scully got into that hospital room. Either someone's been bribed, or genuinely no one managed to notice she was being wheeled in.
I feel there's some problems in pacing, and we've said it before, it's because this is a storyline that had to be expedited because of Gillian Anderson's pregnancy. As I understand it, this was filmed pretty much exactly after she'd just given birth.
Yes, apparently she spent a lot of time asleep, so that she genuinely just dozed off while she was in the hospital bed while they were filming other bits.
But on that basis, you've got a bit of a rush. It's the sharp juxtaposition of, we've given up, we're buying her tombstone, oh, there she is, is really sudden. But if you'd had more time to kind of work with this plot, it was something you could have spaced out a lot more over more episodes.
Yeah, I think also, I have a sneaking suspicion she was meant to be found somewhere and then brought in normally, not as the episode seems to say, she just appeared in the hospital.
And no one can say how she got there.
Yeah, or who dropped her off, or what was going on when she arrived. But she's in a coma. I quite like Melissa's introduction, though it is one of those also slightly awkward ones of, we mentioned her in the cold open, and everyone's going, wait, who? And here she is.
I think in Beyond the Sea we learn that Scully has at least one brother.
Yeah, and this one we learn she definitely has two.
Yeah. But you can infer, I think, at least that one of Scully's brothers is present at the funeral.
Yeah, and the other one is somewhere.
The other one, interestingly, is in the Lost X-Files plot, which I want to talk about a lot later on. There is a unused script which formed the basis of Final Destination, which is all about whichever of Scully's brothers it is that doesn't predominantly appear in the series.
Okay.
He did originally have a plot, they just never made the episode of it. But one day I want to talk about that because you can read the script online and it's spectacular. But Melissa, yeah, she's rather cool. I can give you a bit of trivia about Melissa, actually, is the intent of her introduction in this episode was as a love interest for Mulder.
Okay, I can definitely see that.
I like her because although Mulder's interested in the paranormal, he looks at it through a very dark lens. Is his initial experience with Samantha being taken, and the cases he studies are always predominantly negative. But she's all positive and light and crystals and positive energy. This is like the nice side of the supernatural. I think the two of them would have made an interesting couple. I'll ship it.
Oh yeah, I could go for that one. I think as well then that kind of identifies that Mulder, while claiming to be open-minded, is actually really narrow-minded within that faith. Because he will adhere to the aliens, the ghosts,
it's
the
kind
vampires.
Of weird for a man that believes in alien cattle mutilations that
crystal healing is just...
Crystal healing and holistics and Christianity are just out there.
Yeah, just, no, I can't believe that. That doesn't make any sense. Aliens, now it's like Father Ted, isn't it? Demons sticking you in the arse with pokers for the rest of your days. Now aliens, now there's something that might actually happen.
It's also kind of interesting because perpetuating my belief that the Scully family are all psychics, at least the women in the family are. Because we've now got Scully sees ghosts, her mom has prophetic dreams, and her sister who can converse with spirits and feel auras and things like that. You've got this idea of like witchcraft travelling in the female members of the family and things like that.
Now, it'd be really cool if they actually do something with that. I'm going to say I don't remember this ever coming up directly.
Yeah, I'll take
the Scully family spin-off.
Scully Mysteries Incorporated with our psychic healers.
Oh, we should try and pitch this to Gillian Anderson. I think everyone's still around in terms of the actors. But we do have, though, that Melissa must have expressed something or in contact with Scully, given her introduction to Mulder is, she said not call you Fox. And given that Margaret is resolute in calling him Fox at every opportunity.
I think it's ambiguous like a lot of things in the series. This episode was always pitched as being Mulder's Beyond the Sea, which you can totally see in the structure and how the episode works a lot. But because we see it from Mulder's perspective, you kind of view what Melissa believes to be a bit silly. And it's not until you step back and think, actually, how is this any less silly than anything that Mulder comes out with? That in a series like this, who's to discount crystal healing and her ability to see auras and things like that?
And this is a point where we first see Nurse Owens, who is just kind of lurking behind Mulder and Melissa when we see Scully's vision of them on the dock. And we don't get any explanation of who this woman is, or if she doesn't actually seem to be visible to other people in the hospital.
You do know, in hindsight, watching the episode, I think there's only one sequence where she and Mulder are at the bedside at the same time and they kind of pass each other but don't look at each other.
Well, it's very careful not to have him address her and her not address him, though I think she looks at him. But who this woman is and how she saves Scully is really not clear.
I think Miracle Man's made it clear that there is some stock in Christianity within the world of the X-Files.
So this is an angel.
As we think, I'm going to go with Guardian Angel. She's a guardian angel, or she's a spirit of some kind. You know, a kindly spirit within the hospital who's comforting her or something like that. But either way, she kind of convinces Scully not to give up and not to just succumb to her illness.
And then, of course, we get Frohickey with flowers.
I love Frohickey.
It is odd on rewatch to realise that Frohickey has met Scully once, and only once.
But they had that lovely phone relationship after Mulder sold her for a pair of night vision goggles.
We don't know it. The book, yes. In the actual broadcast episodes, we have no evidence that they ever communicated again.
I think it adds a level of sweetness to Frohickey, because he's always been kind of horny and seedy, but you've got the impression he's the only one of the lone gunmen who actually shows up, and he puts on a suit and brings her flowers even though she's in a coma, and it's just unbelievably sweet.
It is very nice, going to all that effort. And then, of course, we've got to get back to conspiracy mode.
They're all kind of antisocial nerds, but Frohickey kind of shows that he genuinely does like her. I love him. He's always been my favourite lone gunman member. I think he's just so sweet.
So I'm going to note a weird tangent here on the scene with the lone gunman, where they make an offer to Mulder for what they're going to do that evening, which is hop on the internet and criticise the scientific inaccuracies in Earth 2.
Yeah.
Earth 2 was a very short-lived television series broadcast around this time, so they're not talking about the theoretical Earth 2.
Oh, I assumed it was the philosophical concept.
No, this was a TV show that I remember coming out. I never actually managed to watch it, but looking at it again, I've realised I'm going to have to track this down for you, because you'll never guess who's third billed.
Oh, go on.
Clancy Brown.
Oh, the Kurgan.
And in amongst the guest stars is Tim Curry.
You're telling me I've been missing out on this show that has the Kurgan and Wadsworth from Clue in it.
Absolutely. But anyway, that's weirdly what they're on about there. But I think probably of more relevance, although very obviously we're setting something up we're not going to get to yet, is introducing the fourth lone gunman, the Thinker, who they have no idea who he is, they just know who he is, they just talk to him online.
If I remember correctly, he's named after an X-Files fan of the time.
Oh, okay, that's interesting.
As well, yeah, the Thinker was the username of a big, super fan of the show at the time it was made.
Okay.
I think he does appear at one other point in the series, at least.
Yes, I think he has actually one appearance, and that's him.
But this is our introduction to him.
Then we get some weird stuff about the DNA, and they have their theories about what it is a tracking mechanism or it feels like it's sort of throwing out rejected ideas for the episode. In case if it's a tracker, is it metamorphosizing Scully into something else?
I want to say on parts of Tracker, admittedly, we've only got a vague grasp as we cockroaches understand the aliens, but we previously had thrown out that shrapnel in Duane Barry was a tracker.
Yeah, so why we have biological tracker is another weird one.
Unless, of course, these are different people again.
Well, that's true.
It's still increasingly more from this episode, but as I said in Ascension, it feels more like people have taken Scully, not aliens.
Yeah, but in any case, whatever it is designated as poison rather than something active, and that Scully's immune system has been decimated.
I thought it was more that now it had broken down and wasn't being used, it had become toxic.
Yeah, I think that's what they were going for.
Rather than it being injected as a poison.
Yeah. It's whatever she was done for.
It's like the waste product of whatever was previously done.
Which we have no idea about. And Scully's blood apparently, though, does have something interesting in it, given that guy, who I think is Trenchcoat guy as far as the credits are concerned. Guy in Trenchcoat.
The guy that X executes.
Yeah, just killed him. So this next bit, there's the whole actiony chase bit for the episode. But I did like when X encounters Mulder, because he tried to signal him before, ignored the summon.
Which is him pasting 2 bits of tape shaped like an X very subtly in his window.
So no one's going to notice that.
I still think Deep Throat's Morse code over the phone is a lot more subtle.
Yeah, or blue light bulb, I think, is one of them. But anyway, I like X's line, though, when he confronts Mulder. Because it's like, you got him killed, you got her killed, it's not going to happen to me. So very much the whole level of danger in the game of Mulder has managed to just down other people by accident, and X is not going to get into that situation.
It makes him interestingly different to Deep Throat as well.
Yes.
Is X isn't as kindly and approachable as Deep Throat. X will help out where it is convenient for him.
Yes. And also to his purposes, as he said before, though it's not clear what he's getting out of it sometimes, or so far.
It makes him feel more open, though, because as nice as Deep Throat was, you get less of an impression of X being evasive. X is wearing his heart on his sleeve of, I will help you, but I will not die for you.
So after that, there's a whole load of stuff about taking Scully off the life support as per the terms of her living will.
Which, as Scully is a medical practitioner,
she
has made this really specific.
And knows exactly the conditions that she's asking for it to be done under. And Mrs. Scully and Melissa outvote Mulder, who surprisingly gets a say in this at all, really.
Especially as it made clear that Mulder is the co-signature of the living will.
Yeah,
so Mulder should be aware what's in it and has agreed to it.
I get the impression that basically it was a case of, hey Mulder, can you sign my living will as my co-worker? Okay, scribble. didn't actually bother to read it at all.
Well, clearly as people who use guns a lot and get shot at a lot in our everyday employ, this'll never come up.
Oh, of course not. Which I think is actually a conversation he has with Skinner later on. You've got to be prepared for these kind of risks going into this kind of thing. If you're not, don't even try.
Mm.
But then we get Cigarette Smoking Man decides to try and frame Mulder by claiming he shot the man in the hospital. Which then Mulder then manages to do the whole denial thing back to Skinner.
We're still in annoyingly depressed Mulder at this stage.
Yeah.
Well, rightfully depressed Mulder, I suppose, at this stage. But I do like his retorts and how frustrated Skinner gets when Mulder's denying all knowledge.
I mean, it is the shoe on the other foot for the first time. I'm in two minds about this next note I have, though, which was when Skinner asks who's responsible, and Mulder just blames Cigarette Smoking Man, saying he's behind all of it. And it's one of these whole, while you're not wrong, Mulder, I don't understand how you've leapt to this conclusion per se, because it actually very tangential what links him back, as far from your perspective. From our perspective, yeah, we know full well that he's done this.
We've seen all the bits with him in the car with Krycek.
And the secret meeting where Krycek says we've got to get rid of Scully and everything. But Mulder only has seen those cigarette butts from Cancer Man cigarettes left in Krycek's car. And that's...
I think that's the one link we have, really.
Yeah, but
other than that, he's this guy that's just always in Skinner's office.
But the whole idea that he could have done this, whatever happened on top of Skyline Mountain, is that he's that powerful. Cigarette Smoking Man hasn't demonstrated to Mulder he's that potent yet.
No, we know that Deep Throat was high up and had people under his command. All we know really is that the Cancer Man controlled Krycek.
Yeah, and has some sway over Skinner. It's more for the audience than it is for Mulder, because it's a case of, yeah, you've identified the villain, but how does Mulder know he's the villain?
It'd be one of those things where I think maybe Mulder should not have jumped to this conclusion in Skinner's office, but the pack of Murley cigarettes with the message inside should have been the thing that clued him in.
Yeah, that feels a better way of doing it. And
that when he draws that, it's, wait a second, Murley cigarettes and an address. This is the mastermind.
Yeah. But then they seem to have felt that it's better to have that being what leads Skinner to give him Cancer Man's address, even though Skinner very, very delicately never confirms he did it.
He does heavily infer.
He does infer, but he never actually admits to doing it, though, does he?
No, but really, is there anyone else it could be?
Oh, Krycek.
Krycek's got sick of his boss at last.
But anyway, it's nice to see after that, though, we get Don Davis with another cameo as Mr. Scully.
Probably the nicest scene in the episode as well. It is a really beautiful moment, especially as we haven't really seen much of Don Davis because he died during the opening sting of Beyond the Sea.
It's also one of the ones where you can't help but harken it back to Twin Peaks, being this is a shot that you would have actually had in Twin Peaks. Him walking out of the darkness like that in military uniform.
In the stark white room with the shadows that you can't see beyond.
If it had been red curtains and a tiled floor, you'd go, wait a minute, is David Lynch going to sue us?
But it's beautiful.
It's
such
very
a
lovely.
Nice scene and very touching. And given Scully's kind of odd connection with ghosts throughout the series, you feel that it probably actually is her dad there in the room with her, not just a coma hood dream.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's interesting, we don't actually know if Scully remembers this happening at all. I mean, you get into a whole load of perspective stuff and all the near-death experience stuff, but it's interesting that he does say we'll be together again, but not yet.
I thought it was kind of nice as well, as this feels like the message that Luther Boggs could not give Scully at the end of Beyond the Sea. Because in Beyond the Sea, if you remember, Boggs said if Scully came to his execution, he would channel Scully's father who had a message, and Scully did not go because she said she knew what the message would be. Although
this one is tailored for the moment more so than that one was.
It is more tailored for the moment, but it is what Scully wanted to hear, the whole, I would have done anything just to speak to you one last time, I love you so much, you know, that sort of thing that her very militaristic father never said in life.
Yeah. So as we said as well, we've got Melissa is having having lunch with Mulder, which is I can definitely see the setup for what they're going to try and do there. And we know that she has more than one cameo, so audiences didn't quite react in the same way as Phoebe Green. However, we can be pretty sure there's no long-term development there, as much as this was an option.
I imagine
there's only one more time.
I imagine much like Phoebe Green, or does she only appear once more?
I'm pretty sure Melissa has one more appearance.
I imagine it's much like Phoebe Green, where we'll put the feelers out there, and if fans respond to this really positively, this is something we can look into.
But no, fans did not want Melissa Scully any more than they wanted Phoebe.
I liked Melissa.
I
think she sounds fun.
She was very fun.
I mean, it's not a very fun situation to have her in, but she struck me as a character that could be entertaining going forward.
I kind of actually want, though, for missed opportunities, is when Mulder sort of gets up and sort of, frantically wraps the cigarettes, and she just goes, I didn't know you smoked. But yeah, then he goes off to CSM's apartment. And CSM actually does a remarkable job of only alluding to admitting things in passing and not actually answering questions. Because I like things like, he says, I like you, Mulder, I like Scully too, and that's why she was brought back, or given back to you and things. But that implies his level of control again.
I think it also adds more to this whole aliens are not involved, this is a government or a shadowy government thing that has happened.
True, unless they are in direct communication with the aliens, in which case...
Hey boys, why not just come and pick up this random FBI agent and then just deposit her back in 6 months' time for the lulz?
Not so much a Lovecraftian touch, but I think a lot of things were done. I mean, Men in Black did a very similar scene, which is the whole, if people knew what he did, they would be panic in the streets, which is like the speech that Jay gives to Kay at the start of Men in Black.
The idea that humans just cannot take this knowledge.
Yeah. As a kid, you always object to, and these days you're wondering a case of, you could make more of an argument for it, but it's still...
You're going on the basis of people deny climate change, cosmic horror is probably beyond them.
Yes. At the same time, though, it's given Cancerman's positioning as a villain, people might not be able to cope with what you know. Is it by any chance detrimental to everyone? Would we rightfully protest what you know?
Again, we on the outside don't know what he knows, so you can't really judge this.
And then Mulder decides to resign from the FBI.
Well, it is Tuesday.
It is Tuesday. Well, at least he actually wrote the letter this time and gave it to Skinner.
And not just him
saying,
spitballing that he's going to do it.
It is nice, though, when Skinner comes to the office and just tears up the resignation letter in front of him. It's like, no, unacceptable.
I kind of like the anecdote Skinner gives, the very Jacob's Ladder anecdote about the Vietnam War.
Oh, yeah.
Where you kind of get a bit more of an understanding about how Skinner views belief from this as well, as he had this weird near-death experience, out-of-body experience even, and he's too scared to question this any further. It's this thing that happens, he'll never understand it and he does not want to know.
Yep.
Kind of gets Skinner's character down quite nicely. It's also a very militaristic belief.
Yeah.
You can very much see Skinner's belief in towing the line and the government from his feelings towards the Vietnam War, where he wanted to sign up because it felt like the right thing to do, and how his experience in the war changed this kind of feeling.
Yeah. I also like the way he moves his glasses when he tells Mulder this, sort of just very sort of one-on-one. And on that note, Mulder has not been wearing glasses for most of season 1 and season 2 now.
I thought they were just reading glasses anyway, Mulder's.
They were, but he just never uses them, does he? Because he used to put them on all the time.
Is it the idea that she's sexier without them or something like that?
It could be. But then Skinner also drops a bomb onto us in terms of X-Files lore, which is, what FBI, what are you doing? So in case of the X-Files office, Mulder's office, this actually quite large space, is where the photocopier lived. Do you not think there's a better usage of this basement office than the photocopier room?
It's odd because Mulder's office is deceptive, as in the first series it looked quite small, but when you see it from the angle in this episode, it's actually twice the size you think it is.
And there's a whole lab bit down the end that I don't think they ever use for anything.
No. Given that Scully doesn't even have a desk, but they have all this unused space apparently.
Yep. What even is going on? But Mulder apparently decides to, to continue to try and quit, so X gives him a plane ticket. They hardly know each other, as Mulder says. But then we get into the whole, they've set this up so that Mulder can get revenge on the person who took Scully, which does actually point very heavily towards it being the government, being that apparently there's a human being who did this.
Unless the Greys are breaking into his apartment now to steal evidence.
I mean, that could be quite fun. But it is called the question in the case of the guy who did this to Scully. It's a case of, at which point, the person who was flying the helicopter, the person who made the deal with Duane Barry, the person who did the medical treatment, by the way, can you tell us what that medical procedure was so that we can get Scully some help? And we just skim past all of those for Rigney.
They would have been things that we would have learnt if Mulder hadn't gone to be at Scully's bedside while she was dying, though.
Well, admittedly, that depends if the guy he just didn't shoot the guy when he walked through the door.
I do wonder if this cripples Mulder in hindsight, that he went to Scully's bedside and then she gets better the next morning.
Yeah, because if I just hung on there.
Scully did not see us become infectious, apparently.
I also kind of like the slightly subtle indication. The person who did this to Mulder, Melissa knocks on the door. You! I knew the crystal
I guess
alien
if
was
you're
up
going
front.
for absolute conspiracy, that could have been Melissa showing up because she is the person who did this. Wouldn't that have been a twist?
That would have been a twist.
I don't get the feeling that's what they're going for, but...
Not at all.
This ruins everything I put in my notes.
And we do find what Mulder apparently views Scully will really make her feel better after her abduction, which was Superstars of the Super Bowl video.
It's very playful.
Well, it is I know it's very playful. It's still got to say, I get this is probably a joke, Mulder, but you don't want to give her flowers, chocolates, something, her favourite book. I mean, I understand she's very keen on the writer Jose Chung, just throwing this out there. Getting his latest one.
It's a sweet reunion.
It's a very sweet reunion. It's nice to see them. And basically,
the fact that nothing's changed as well, they've still got the banter.
Yes, and Mulder's is just so happy that she's back and is also immediately cut off. It's that contrast to how he treated Duane Barry and the girl in Born Again, of Scully is a potential goldmine of information, and she's trying to say that she can't answer anything, and he's brushing that straight off because it's Scully.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's Golden Shippers. Yeah, we can see where you're coming from, as usual.
It's probably that level of trust where Scully says, I don't remember. It's like, yes, you're unconscious 90% of the time and don't see this anyway. I believe this.
No, it's hypnotherapy with you. I've got him right outside. He's ready.
Mulder would normally just overly harass someone because he thinks they know something. With Scully, he knows it's the truth because he trusts her.
Exactly. He does the good thing of handing the crucifix back to Scully, which is nice. That comes around in full circle. Problem is, it's been 2 episodes, and that feels like a longer time frame, doesn't it? That the necklace, he's been carrying on the whole time. You feel there should be more of a duration.
You did, with it 3 being a vampire story, it did clock the fact that he was actually wearing her necklace as well.
Yeah. But that didn't actually seem to factor into the episode. We close out with the unresolved mystery of exactly who was Nurse Owens and what did she do and how did she keep entering Scully's visions as she did?
I don't think it's sinister, at least.
Oh, no, it's not sinister.
A lot of the X-Files stings are quite dark and sinister and have these sort of uncomfortable undercurrents. With this, it's like, oh, must have been a guardian angel all along. That's the power of Scully's faith.
Yep. That's all we got.
She's important and the big guy is going to keep her alive a bit longer.
Okay, do you have anything else for this episode?
No, I think that's everything.
Okay, so I don't know if you want to do Kim's Conspiracy Corner, because this one, it's an awkward one to do. There's some stuff there, but it's not actually substantive.
I will do a diminished Conspiracy Corner. I don't have a lot to add to it this week, but there are a couple of little things I think we can note.
So, as per the norm, we take you to Kim's Conspiracy Corner.
Clarifying some of the things that were left a bit in the air in Ascension, we have learnt this week that it is probably the government that are spiriting away people. There's nothing to say that aliens aren't as well, but at least in the case of Scully, it does appear that she was taken away by men from the government who have held her and returned her in a bad way. It's inferred that they don't always bring people back, but have in the case of Scully because the councilman liked her. It's clear that they are doing something to people. We don't know what it is, but it has left these kind of branched DNA in her bloodstream, which does show that there was something they were doing to her on a genetic level that they've now finished and shut down. We don't know what that is, but this might infer the fact that this is something specific to humans, as we did discover in Duane Barry and Ascension that the aliens have their own ways of tracking people, which are generally through implants rather than through any sort of messing around with DNA. We do also learn in this episode, or not so much learn, but consolidate the fact that the cigarette smoking man has a lot of power. We just don't know who he answers to and who answers to him. But this man is the shadowy government that seems to be behind a lot of conspiracies. He specifically says he's watched presidents die. Watched, I presume, meaning he's been there and been integral in it. But we don't know exactly what that means or the depth that this has. all we can really say is that the government has been deeply involved, and it is really, really lucky that Mulder has got Scully back, though it's unclear why she kind of recovered so quickly at the end of that episode and what implications that will have going forward. I think that's about all we can glean this time, isn't it?
I think so. So, next week we have Firewalker and Red Museum.
Are you dying on the inside there, Nick?
A little bit. We might discover that Firewalker is an overlooked classic of the series, and Red Museum is an episode of The X-Files.
I don't remember disliking either of them as much as 3. I'm going to hold to that.
I think, if I remember right, and I'll look it up for next time, that Red Museum was pitched at one point as being a crossover into a different series.
Okay.
It didn't happen. Our email address is thingsargettingstrange42@gmail.com.
You can also talk with me over on social media. You can find us on Twitter and Tumblr. Our username on both is getstrange42. You can also find us on Mastodon at getstrange42@universidon.com. Or you can find us on Facebook by searching for Things Are Getting Strange and X-Files Rewatch podcast. And do get in contact if you liked 3. Please, I want to find someone who liked the episode who can tell me why.
We live in hope. So our theme music is envisioned by Kevin MacLeod. You can find that on incompetech.com. Licensed under the Creative Commons by Attribution 3.0. Thank you all for listening, and until next week, remember, everything dies.